Going to get started in just 1 minute, team. I'll be right back with you. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Tuesday, April 20th. Bittersweet today, our last Ignite class for this session at least, but don't worry. We will be teaching Ignite probably 4 or 5 times throughout the year. So we'll take a few weeks off and jump back into it and start thinking about what other trainings will come up in May. So anyway, today's our last session for elementals. Session number 9, contract to close. And, basically we're just going to cover a general overview of a transaction. And we are going to talk about some areas on where to, mitigate risk, because obviously there are times when deals fall apart and we want to avoid that as much as we possibly can. Not always possible. But, as a good agent, we're always going to factor in a cancellation rate for our deals. Luckily, right now, cancellation rates are relatively low because buyers are just doing whatever they got to do to get into the houses. So that's good news. When the market shifts more on the buyer side, you may see a little bit higher cancellation rates. But we'll talk about things today to avoid that at all costs. And we'll jump into Command a little bit and take a look and see what Command can do to help us, have an overview of the process. Okay, so let's get into it. So we're going to talk about, more on the running the business side of things today. Negotiating contracts, showings, how that all ties into, our contract to close process. And first, we'll talk about our. Let's see. Do I have the right slideshow open? I don't think I do. Hold on. Give me 1 second. I'm going to be right back with you guys. Okay, sorry about that, folks. I was in a completely different slideshow, and now I think we got the right one. So now we're looking good. So we're talking about negotiating TC management, vendor management, compliance, and risk management to stay out of trouble. So, again, as always, folks, feel free to, stop and drop comments in the chat. If you have any questions, unmute yourself, raise your hand. Let me go ahead and put our manual into the chat box here real quick. So that way you guys have that. Okay. Boom. There's that. All right. There we go. So back to what we were talking about here. So, running our business, we want to talk about basically buyer and seller timelines first. So, with the timelines, this is great to give you an overview of the sales process, and this is something that I know a lot of you internally struggle with, because you tend to think that you don't want to lead generate because you don't feel like you know what you're doing, or that you don't know how to sell a house. And the reality is, the only way to really learn how to sell a house is by going through the process and like being in it and seeing what happens, when documents are coming and timelines are approaching. But we do want to give an overview, and I think what that'll do is it'll help you have a little bit more confidence when you are talking to buyers and sellers, because at least you'll know the process. But if I really, ask you all to think about what happens in a deal, I think you all would have a general understanding of what does happen. And remember, you know more than your clients do, no matter what. Okay. And you don't have to ever know everything. You just have to be a professional, and a professional knows where their resources are, knows who to reach out to get the information that you need. And typically that'll start with me or our ALC or the team leaders. We have plenty of resources available for you. Okay. So let's look at what a timeline looks like. Okay. So some of the basics: execute a contract, work with a lender, the home inspection, home insurance, home warranty, and we close. So those are a couple of the things that are on the buyer side. Here's a couple things on the seller side: accept an offer, get an inspection done, get the appraisal done, and close. Okay. So that's a general overview. But what I want to do right now is let's just draw this out on a whiteboard on our Zoom here, and you guys can follow along on page 3 and 4 on your guide. You can either do that or just take some notes on your computer, or you can just take a screenshot of what we're about to draft here. But what we're going to do is basically just map out a timeline so you have a better understanding of this whole process. And it's not overly complicated. Okay, selling a house, there are a lot of moving pieces, but it's really not that difficult to understand, how things work. But let's go ahead and get started. Okay. So I'm going to do my best to work this little whiteboard here, and I'm going to ask for you guys to, participate. And we're going to do basically a combined buyer and seller, because it's all the same, right? But just two different sides of it, looking at the same stuff. Okay. So obviously, the very first thing that happens is we get an accepted offer. Okay, without that, we don't have much to work on. So after an offer is accepted, the next thing that happens is we open escrow. So now I'm going to ask you folks, once we get an accepted offer, we open escrow. Okay, and I'll explain a little bit about opening escrow. Let's do that now, actually. So what does opening escrow actually mean? Well, it simply means the listing side, the seller is going to choose the escrow company, and they're going to call that company to open the escrow. So what does that mean? Well, basically it means we send them a copy of the fully executed purchase agreement. Okay, we get them the offer, we send that over to them, and at that point, the escrow company is going to also get the contact information for the lender, for the title company, and they're going to be kind of a conduit for facilitating the transaction. They work for both parties. Escrow is a neutral third party that essentially handles everybody's money, balances the books, and pays attention to certain reports like the title report, the natural hazards, a few things like that. Okay. So once we open escrow, you guys tell me, what's the next thing that happens after we open escrow?
Send the deposit.
You got it. That is correct. That is correct. So let's go ahead and put that here. And who knows how many days the deposit needs to go to escrow?
3.
Is that business days or calendar days?
Business.
Business.
You got it. You got it. Remember, the purchase agreement generally has everything in calendar days, except for the deposit. That's one of the only ones that is business days. And really, it's pretty self-explanatory. The banks that need to be open to wire money aren't open on the weekends, okay? So generally speaking, Monday through Friday is a business day, excluding holidays and the weekends. Interestingly enough, the MLS recently, just like a week ago, basically said that they are now counting Saturdays as business days. Now, that's not going to affect your purchase agreements, but what it is going to affect is your listings. So they basically say that if you do any public marketing on a property, it has to go in the MLS. The listing has to go in the MLS within one business day. They are now counting Saturday as a business day. So I think people were probably, starting to market a home on a Friday and then letting the weekend go without changing it to active, basically. And then on Monday, changing it to active. So now they're not allowing that to happen. So, everybody's just finding little loopholes. So there you go. All right. So deposit sent to escrow. At this point, I'm gonna just add to the open escrow part, because what happens here, one second. Does Nick know how to use the Zoom? Let's find out. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I mentioned, and I just want to put it on the notes here so that you guys can see it visually, and again, take notes on this. But when we open an escrow, we're basically engaging title, the escrow company, the lender, and so all those processes are also happening during the transaction. The title company is starting their investigation. They're ordering the preliminary title report, researching the property. Escrow is drafting up their escrow instructions, which basically should mirror mostly the purchase agreement, although there are a few things that they do a little bit differently. The lender gets a copy of the contract and they start collecting all their documents so they can submit to their underwriter and get the appraisal ordered. So there's a lot of different tracks that are all kind of happening at the same time, if that makes sense. So now deposit gets sent to escrow. So now we have our open escrow, and that's happening within 3 days. Let's go ahead and make a note of that. 3 business days. Now, some of these timeframes I'm going to put them as the defaults in the contract. They can be changed through the negotiation in the purchase agreement. So I'm going to put the defaults, but some of them may be different on your actual transactions. Okay. So after we get our escrow opened and the check gets sent to the escrow company, basically the next thing that happens are disclosures, inspections, and reports. Okay. So now we're doing what I would call our due diligence. Okay, if that makes sense. See how many typos I get today while I'm trying to talk and type at the same time. All right, there we go. Boom. So when we say disclosures, inspections, and reports, okay, the seller has 7 days to deliver. And then the buyer has 17 days to review and approve. Okay. So this is one of our major contingencies, right? The inspections, the disclosures, and the reports. So the seller is going to prepare all of their disclosure packet. And that includes things like the major ones, the transfer disclosure statement, the TDS, the seller property questionnaire, the SPQ, the listing agent's AVID, agent visual inspection. So on the seller side, that AVID needs to accompany the TDS, okay? And then there's a whole bunch of other ones. The water heater statement of compliance, smoke detector, lead-based paint, the natural hazards report gets ordered by the escrow company and delivered. The preliminary title report is created from the lender to deliver to the buyer for review as well. And then once the buyer receives it, they have 17 days to review and approve. And this is what we would call their due diligence or investigation period. They're going to review all this and make sure there's nothing on any of these documents that would, basically prevent them from wanting to buy the home. There's a bunch of disclosures that are statutorily required. There's some other ones that are on the forms that need to be completed. And really, when I talk to a seller on the listing side, I tell them, look, these documents are your shield to protect you against a lawsuit. And so we really want to over disclose. We want to tell as much as we possibly can about the property to the buyer, right? And my rule of thumb for disclosures is this: if you have to ask, the answer is yes. So what does that mean? Well, if you call me and say, Nick, should I disclose X, Y, and Z? My answer is pretty much every single time going to be absolutely yes, you do. Okay, that's just how I roll. All right. I mean, there's no sense in like even having a debate about it. So should I disclose it? Yes. The answer is always going to be yes in my book. Okay. Now, the buyer's going to review all this stuff. They have 17 days to decide if they want to approve, cancel. They can cancel the escrow and get their deposit back, certainly. Or they can make a request of the seller. A request would be asking potentially for a repair, or a credit towards repairs, or a price reduction, or some other request, maybe a request for more information. Okay, so they have that right to make those requests at this time. Now, a couple of things that you want to keep in mind. All homes in California are sold as is. Okay, the purchase agreement says the property is sold in its physical as is condition. What you see is what you get. Now, the buyer has the right to conduct investigations. The buyer has the right to make any request they want. They can ask for the house for free if they want to. Okay, they can ask for anything they want. The seller, it's important to understand, has no obligation to do any of the buyer's requests, nor do they even have to respond. The seller is not obligated to even respond to a repair request. Okay, now customarily they do, but they don't have to. But it is important for you to be educating your clients. And as you look at some of this stuff and we think about risk management and making sure our deals close, this is probably one of the biggest areas where a deal will fall apart. So we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute and how we can, work to protect our transaction and bulletproof it. Okay. So again, property sold as is, buyer can make any requests they want. Seller has no obligation to agree or respond. Now, this is where the seller has most of the risk factor, because the buyer now has the ability to cancel and get their money back based on anything at all that they don't approve in the property. Okay. All right. And again, if you have questions, comments, feel free to just go ahead and unmute and interrupt or drop it in the chat, and happy to talk to you more about that. All right, let's keep going here. Let me just open the chat, make sure I have that going. I do. All right, beautiful. Okay, next. What's next? Well, basically, after we have this part of it, the next thing that we're looking for is essentially our appraisal. Okay, this is the next kind of major milestone that we're going to be looking at. And again, with time frames, thinking about our time frames, the appraisal default in the contract, that contingency is 17 days. Okay. Should I put little dashes in front of all these so they can stand out a little bit? Hopefully this helps make it look a little easier on your screen. And again, on page 3 and 4 in your instructor manual, you can follow along and write these notes out or type them up on a document on your own computer. That way you've got it available for yourself for future reference. And you'll see later, we can build custom listing and sale guides in our consumer app, which we'll look at a little bit later, okay? All right, appraisal, 17 days. So what is the appraisal? Well, if you think about it, the lender is about to loan many hundreds of thousands of dollars to your clients, to the buyers, okay? And the lender is in business of collecting money and interest off the loans they make. And so they have risk factors, and they want to make sure that they're not over lending, because if they lend too much money and then the market shifts or a buyer doesn't feel that it's worth it to them anymore, they can stop making payments. And what happens then? Well, the bank would have to foreclose on them. And the banks don't want to foreclose. They don't want to take listings back. They're not real estate brokers. They don't like having to sell properties, and they lose money through short sale and foreclosure. So what they're doing is they're protecting their investment by having an appraisal completed. So an appraisal is when a neutral third party certified appraiser is going out to the property and investigating it. Now, it's subjective, meaning it's just an opinion of value by one person who has been certified to do this for their career. And sometimes you get really good appraisers, sometimes you don't. In fact, I was on Reddit this morning reading an article in the real estate Reddit about appraisals. And one of the people on there said, I met an appraiser for a VA property, and they said that 90% of the time they bring the value in low because they want to protect the veterans and not let homes appreciate so fast, right? Which kind of blew my mind that an appraiser had that perspective. That's not what they are hired to do. They're hired to give an opinion of value on that day, not to slow the increase in values. That actually hurts the people that are trying to buy the property. So I was kind of blown away that, you know, one person had this mindset around their appraisals, which is, I think, a little bit dangerous. So anyways, all kinds of crazy stuff out there. But really, you know, the vast majority of appraisers are going out there. They understand the market, you know, they understand how hot it is, and they're going to do everything they can to bring the value in. You know, the last thing you want to get a reputation of in appraising is being that appraiser that kills deals left and right. Obviously, that's not a good thing. Okay. All right, let's keep going. So we have our appraisal.
I have a question on appraisals.
Yeah, go for it.
So is this 17 days to complete or 17 days for it to be reviewed from the day of completion?
It's 17. It's supposed to be ordered, completed, and brought back to the lender within the 17-day time frame. So after 17 days, and when I throw these numbers out, or these number of days, these are what we call a contingency period. This is how long the buyer has to get the appraisal completed, to do their inspections and make requests. And after the time expires, the buyer is supposed to remove their contingencies, whichever one it is, inspection, appraisal, disclosures, reports, loan, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So it needs to be done within that time frame. Once the contingency expires, the seller can then they can give a notice to perform, a document that says, hey, your time is up. You need to either remove your contingency or cancel, in which case the listing or the seller would have to give the buyer the deposit back. Okay. All right. That's the appraisal. Now,
Quick question.
Please.
Does that include any repairs that the appraiser might call out, like calling out straps on water heaters or missing smoke detectors, stuff like that, that needs to be completed within the 17 days as well?
So good question. So any lender required or appraisal required repairs would need to be completed prior to close. All repairs, in fact, not just lender or appraiser required. Any repairs that are negotiated and agreed upon would need to be done prior to the final walkthrough, is what the contract says, which is typically somewhere around 5 days before the close of escrow. And that brings actually up another good point, Jennifer. If the appraiser calls out repairs, unless they're statutorily required or government required, it's a negotiation. Okay, so on FHA or VA, their appraisers tend to be a little bit more strict. If they see, like FHA is notorious for requiring that any peeling paint needs to be remedied. Now, the seller is not obligated to do that work. It has to be done on a normal repair request. Now, if it is a water heater strapping or anchoring or bracing or smoke detectors, those are all required by law. So those must be done. But other repairs outside of that scope are negotiable, and the seller doesn't have to do them. In fact, I've seen times where a buyer actually goes in and does some of the work requirements by the appraiser prior to close, and taking on all the risk. If it doesn't close for whatever reason, they're just willing to do that. So, but yeah, so that's a little bit more about lender required repairs. That make sense? Awesome.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
cool. Got it. All right. So what's next? Well, basically at this point, we move into loan approval. And that has a 21-day default in the purchase agreement. So again, the lender is working behind the scenes to get the loan submitted to an underwriter. The underwriter is reviewing all the documentation that the buyer provided. We're talking about, credit reports, bank statements, pay stubs, W-2s, other sources of income and financial documents. And they're taking all that, and they're taking that and grabbing the appraisal, and they're basically looking at this whole package and saying, is the home approved? Is the value approved? Is the buyer approved? And once they have everything done, you're going to get a loan approval. Typically, it's what we call a conditional loan approval. Okay. Most often, they'll give you an approval and there'll be a list of conditions. And usually it's pretty basic stuff. If there's a new pay period that has expired, they'll want a new W-2 or a new a new pay stub. Maybe a bank statement has come out. They're going to want to take a look at the new bank statements. Sometimes there are other things that, could be concerns, especially if it's not a kind of a slam dunk type of loan where it's just a W-2 person that doesn't have a lot of external accounts, things like that. But there are other loans that may require more documentation or explanations. Sometimes people have like gaps in employment. Lenders want to know what happened and why. They want to source money. Where did this cash come from? Why is that in your bank? There's all kinds of things that could come up. But generally speaking, you're going to have some basic conditions to fulfill to sign off on. And then once we have all that done, okay, most of the rest of the things that happen here are going to be financial related. So after our loan approval, we are going to get a clear to close. Okay. I should say actually the CD, the closing disclosure. Okay. So the CD is essentially a document that is delivered to the buyer. And the buyer, this is a new law as of like 2008, 2009, because of the financial crisis and all the, predatory lending that was happening back in like 2004, 5, 6, 7. They have a new law that says the lender has to give the buyer a closing disclosure that's on a very simple to read couple pages that says, here's every dollar you need to spend to buy this house. Here's your interest rate. Here's your payment. Here's disclosing whether it's adjustable or fixed, how long the term of the loan is, and any other terms in easy to understand language. Because back in the day when, we had our last financial disaster, basically, we had these loans where, you didn't have to prove any income or even employment, right? They had no docs, no employment loans, with zero down payment. And a lot of people that were buying just didn't really know what they were getting themselves into. Now, should they have paid more attention? Yeah, of course. I mean, your consumers got to pay more attention. But, it was almost like they were getting free money in buying a really nice, expensive house for very, very little cash and a low payment. But then all of a sudden, the payments started resetting. They were adjustable. And it really, caused a major, financial collapse. So they added this new law that a disclosure needs to go out. So that has a waiting period of a couple of days, depending on how the disclosure is delivered. And once that disclosure goes out and the buyer agrees and approves, well, then at this point, we're going to be getting ready to close. So now we're going to get our clear to close from the bank. This is basically the bank saying, okay, everything's good. We've fulfilled all the financial conditions. The loan's fully approved. The buyer signed off on the disclosure. The appraisal's back. Everything's good to go at this point. Okay. So once that clear to close is done, we would move on to getting loan documents. Okay. So loan docs to escrow. Let's see. So yes, Rassi, that's correct. That did not exist previously back in I think in 2000, maybe 8. or 2009, somewhere around that time frame, there was a new part of the government created called the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, the CFPB, and their job was to go and look into all the consumer financing available and create new disclosure requirements. Things like credit cards, auto loans, home loans. Because you go to buy something and you're financing it. The people selling were just trying to slam deals through, and here's your payment, here's everything, boom, let's get out of here, let's call it a day. And so what happened is people were getting taken advantage of because they were just pushed through the process so fast without really understanding what was happening. So they created some layers of protection for consumers. Okay. So now loan docs go to escrow. So the bank, right, creates this giant package of documents, the loan documents. And, if you do this in paper, it's like seriously like 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick of documents. And it's all the terms of the loan. And it talks about, when's the payment due? What happens if you don't make your payment? Are there prepayment penalties if you pay the loan off early, right? It's the deed of trust. It's the deed of trust. So we have a deed for the house, and then we have a deed for the lender for the financing, okay? And those loan documents spell everything out. The buyer has to get everything notarized where they sign everything. And then once that's done, they go back to the lender. The lender checks them in, reviews them, make sure everything's signed appropriately. And then we start thinking about really wrapping this deal up. So right around this same time, we do a final walkthrough. Actually, you know what? I'll even add prior to this, since it did come up. Repairs, any repairs that were negotiated would then be completed. We would have our final walkthrough done. And the final walkthrough, as I mentioned, 5 days prior to close, okay? 5 days prior to close. So the repairs need to be completed before the final walkthrough. And the final walkthrough is when the buyer gets to go back through the house to make sure that the property is in the same condition as originally agreed, okay? So 5 days prior to close, they're looking at repairs. They're making sure the place is in the same condition. It's not a contingency of the agreement. There is no cancellation right. The buyer doesn't have the option to stop closing. But if some repairs weren't completed or what have you, this would be a chance to try to address it prior to close. And if you can't, the buyer would still need to close escrow, and their remedies for the seller not performing on their obligations would be, mediation, arbitration, small claims, and so on. Okay, but in most cases, a seller gets things done, and things go relatively smoothly. Okay, so once the docs are signed, repairs completed, final walkthrough is done, we're going into kind of a two-step process to close.
Hey Nick, I had a question regarding the potential mediation, arbitration, small claims you were talking about.
Yep.
So let's just say they're doing the walkthrough or whatnot, if I guess how would you know if that was the step you needed to take, and if you took that, what do we do? I mean, what action do we do? I mean, is someone gonna represent us, or how does that process work if we realize that is where it has to go?
Yeah.
Or how do we even know that has to go there?
It happens all the time. I see this relatively frequently. So the escrow closes, and we did the final walkthrough, and let's just say the seller hasn't completed a work requirement, right? And they say, "Oh, we'll get it done. We'll get it done." And then we close. Buyer gets the keys, moves in, and realizes this wasn't completed. Something wasn't done. The very first thing that happens is in Zip Forms, there's a letter that's it's seller buyer demand for seller to complete repairs or whatever it is. I can't remember the exact name of the letter, but it basically says, "Hey, you said you were going to do this. It's in the contract. You agreed to it. You didn't do it, and now we're making a demand for you to complete these items. And if you don't, we're going to pursue our dispute resolution. Whenever something that was agreed upon doesn't happen, you have a dispute. And the dispute resolutions per the contract, number one, are mediation. Number two would be arbitration if all parties agreed to arbitration. And then number three, potentially could be small claims, depending on the amount of damages, right? The amount that either party was damaged, which I believe was like under 10 grand, basically. Okay, so seller doesn't, fix something in the house. You make the demand, they still don't fix it. You would then file for mediation, and mediation is where you go with in front of somebody that has real estate experience, and that person is going to encourage the parties to settle on an agreement. Okay, and if everybody agrees, they sign documents, and then the performance has to happen after that. If that doesn't happen, it's either small claims or arbitration. Arbitration is where you go in front of an arbitrator who's kind of like a judge. There's no jury though, it's just one person that listens to the argument and then makes a decision and says, you have to do this, whoever the party is that they make the award to. And then you have to pursue whatever the judgment is. Or same thing in small claims. You go in front of the judge, judge makes a decision, there's a judgment issued, and then you basically have to enforce that judgment. So if there is a dispute between the buyer and the seller and it doesn't get resolved, either party, whoever feels they were damaged, would hire their own attorney. Okay, you guys all as agents have errors and omissions insurance, but that's if you do something wrong, not if a buyer or seller does something wrong. Okay, so if you guys screw up or there's some sort of a dispute between you and your clients, then your insurance, you would pay your deductible, and then you would be then covered legally, right? As long as it wasn't like negligence or something extraordinary. Okay, but if the buyer or seller have a dispute with each other and they need a legal representation, they would hire their own counsel. They would hire their own lawyers. Okay, so that's how that process essentially works.
So that's not something where as agents we're still kind of still binded to them or have to still be with them or give them guidance or advise them. That's just on their own if they have to get to that stage, or we still have to kind of stick around in a sense, even though the escrow closed.
We'll help them, we'll help them as much as we can. But once the escrow closes, you no longer have representation. Your agency relationship is terminated upon close of escrow because you've done your job. You've completed what you were hired to do. But
Okay.
if there's an issue, obviously you guys want to collect referrals from your past clients, so you're going to help as much as you can. You'll provide them these demand letters and guide them as best you can. Usually you'll call me and say, what should I do? And I'll tell you, use this letter, make the request. If that doesn't work, tell them what they got to do next, right? So I work with you to help, figure out what that looks like. And there's times where, you settle. We had a property where one of our agents represented a seller, and the seller was a friend of theirs who flipped the house. And the buyers, after the fact, came back and said, hey, there's foundation damage. We want $20,000 or we're going to start the mediation process. So I talked to our agent and I asked, did you walk the property at all prior, during the repairs? And they said yes. And, they didn't think that they remembered any foundation issues, but I said, look, you probably have some liability here, and probably the seller does too. Your deductible is $5,000. I think you should try to settle. And ultimately, they got the buyer down to $7,500. Our agent contributed a little bit, like $2,500 of it, to pay off essentially the buyer from suing, right? So there are times where the clients may think that you had responsibility. Especially if a client hires a lawyer, they're always going to include us as real estate brokers because they know we have insurance to cover, and they usually think they squeeze money out of us. But you as agents, you guys have limits on your exposure because of your deductible, your insurance deductible that you've got. Okay.
Okay. So sorry, and then so all the arbitration and mediation that applies to the requests you mentioned, but that also applies to like sellers failing to disclose. That's the same process as well. If they fail to disclose something you found out, like
Yep.
you said.
Basically, yes. So in this case, that's what happened. The buyer felt the seller didn't disclose something, and they also felt that the agent had a duty as well to disclose and did not. And so instead of, risking going through a lawsuit or a mediation, they decided to settle it, which is usually the best way to go about it. And it looks like it all has resolved itself. So yes, very similar process.
What happened with
Thank
the
you.
inspection? They didn't do any inspection?
They did inspections, but once they moved in, they tore the floors up to redo the flooring themselves, and they found foundation damage. And the seller had put in like new laminate flooring, but the buyers decided they didn't want that. So as soon as they pulled the flooring up, they found cracking and other evidence of damage, and they felt that the sellers knew about it. So it's like, okay, well, do we go to court and try to prove that we didn't know anything about it? So they decided that was not the smartest course of action. They just said, look, we made profit on the deal. We're going to write them a check to make them go away. And then our attorneys then are drafting a hold harmless agreement. So
real quick, Nick, just so I have the story clear, because I don't know, I find this one pretty interesting. So the buyers, they had a buyer's inspection. Buyer's inspection clearly said, hey, there's no foundation issue. The buyers buy the house, they're cool with it. They rip up the floor, and this is slab on grade, or this is raised foundation?
I'm sure it must have been a slab if they saw foundation damage there. I don't know the details.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. Okay. So there's a huge crack in the slab. It's I guess it doesn't sound like you know exactly the details, but still there's some sort of crack. And at that point, because obviously a buyer's inspector can't see that because it's concealed by a floor, now they say, hey, the previous owners, you guys knew about this, and why don't you say anything? And so that's the long story short. Is that?
That's basically it. They felt that the
Okay.
seller knew about it because they had replaced the floors and should have been able to see this.
Yeah. I mean that makes sense. But I mean, are they? Yeah, I guess they could have fought it. Are they engineers? Are they licensed contractors? At that time when they installed the floor, did they say, hey, man, well, maybe that's a foundation issue? They could have safely assumed that there's no foundation issue. I mean, I guess that's besides the point because they didn't ultimately go to court, but yeah, it's kind of a crazy story to me. I mean, it's kind of,
Well,
yeah.
here's the thing with all that. There's a ton of people flipping properties right now, and
Yeah.
I believe that they're held to an even higher standard,
Okay.
and yet they
Yeah.
feel that they're held to a lower standard because what most flippers do, they buy the property, but they have a crew that does all the work for them. They don't do the work themselves, and so they just say, "Oh, I never lived there. I didn't know anything about the house. I have nothing to disclose." And yet the reality is their crew is telling them, "Hey, you got to do this, you got to do that. We're aware of it." And so they need to over disclose. Like they need to say, "Hey, there was a crack in the foundation, and it was this big, and we didn't do anything to remedy it, and then at least the buyer just has been told. That's all it takes is disclose. I mean, the buyer probably still would have bought the property for the same price,
Mhm.
but ultimately, they're held to a higher standard. So, or they should be at least. So
Yeah.
I know if you're interested in doing that, you'll want to, over disclose and document everything, take pictures and all that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I'm asking the questions, just because flippings, that's kind of the direction I'm going, and that's where my experiences have been. And yeah, I think thinking about it more and how you said, yeah, they typically have a crew. I mean, yeah, their crew is typically unlicensed, sometimes undocumented, dudes,
So
from Mexico that don't have any, that aren't going to tell, the builder, hey, or the owner builder, the developer, the flipper, hey, there's a crack. They don't, they're just going in there to knock out a floor real quick. You know what I mean? They get paid $200 a day to knock out a floor real quick, not to tell them, hey, let's stop today and come over here. And yeah, there's this crack. I think it might be a problem. And, at the end of the day, yeah, all they probably had to do was throw some epoxy in that crack and they probably would have been fine, and disclose it. And they probably would have been fine. I don't like $7,500 for a Crocs foundation. I don't know if this was like on a hill or something, but it's like,
I mean, a good flipper will do that. Not to go too deep into the rabbit hole here with all that, but the
Yeah.
reality is the owner has a duty to be aware of these things, and they can't just say no one ever told me. That's not sufficient. So if the buyer comes back, they're going to say you either knew about it or you should have known about it and reported it to us. So anyways, as you guys have problems and challenges with this stuff, you'll reach out to me directly one-on-one for very specific scenarios. But hopefully, they'll be limited in your career. But let's keep moving on. So with our process here, we've gotten to the end where we fund the loan. The bank sends the money to escrow, or I should say to the title company. Title, pays off the old loan, sends the money to escrow at that point. Escrow pays off bills, cuts commissions, get the seller's net proceeds delivered or ready to deliver. And then typically the next day, the property records. Recording is when the title company takes the actual grant deed, a document that's notarized by the seller, giving the property to the buyer, goes to the county recorder's office and records the document. And that's the official closing of escrow or recording. And so we always are, excited and waiting to hear eagerly with anticipation of when that happens, because then we can start thinking about the next step, which is possession. Possession is, when does the buyer get the keys? Okay, they're so common right now to have rent backs where the seller stays in possession of the property for, a couple of days to a couple of months, and then the buyer gets the keys. There's a whole process with all of that, obviously, too, with using the appropriate documentation and if there's any sort of compensation there. And once the buyer gets the keys, you're pretty much done. Hopefully, if all is good. The last thing that I would add to our list here is you asking for referrals. Now, I put this here at the end, but the reality is you're going to be asking for referrals through the entire transaction. Okay, we always are going to be asking for referrals because, when a buyer is buying and a seller is selling, they're telling everybody about it. They're talking about their move and how excited they are. And that's when the people that they know start thinking, maybe I should be doing this, or, oh, we're thinking about selling or buying. These are the best times to be asking for referrals all along this whole process here. Okay. So if you want, go ahead and take a screen grab of this. I'm going to put our PowerPoint back in real quick here. So hopefully you've been taking notes. Otherwise, grab a screen capture and we are going to move on. We still got a lot to get to. Okay. Here we go. All right, back into our slides. So basically, we talked about the timelines, and then it's all about communication points. And it basically says, well, when do we communicate? And this is going to piggyback on our best practices. So I'm going to jump to that slide right now as well. Best practices, timelines, communication, et cetera, et cetera. So, the notes and my information here says, like, when and where should we be communicating and with who? And, the bottom line is, we know it's mass communication. You should be communicating with everybody at least weekly, if not every few days, depending on where along the process you are, right? So when you open escrow, obviously there's communication with the escrow company, the lender. You guys are all going to hire ideally a transaction coordinator to make sure that you're getting all the documents needed for compliance so you can get paid on time and have a complete file. So there's a lot of communication going there. Your TC will do a lot of the communication for you and copy you on a lot of things. So you can just kind of be managing things from above and making sure, everything is happening as needed. But that leads us to talk about risk avoidance, best practices. So where is a deal at risk of falling apart? You guys tell me, where do you think a deal is going to fall apart most likely?
Appraisals and funding the loan?
Appraisal, definitely. Funding, hopefully not, but yes, getting the loan, it really would be more loan approval, right? Getting the loan actually approved, right? And then where else? Anywhere else that you guys can think of where a deal is at risk?
It's inspection.
Inspection. That's it, for sure. So think about this. We've got essentially, there's a whole bunch of contingencies in the contract, but the three major ones are investigation, appraisal, and loan. And those are the 3 points where you're going to see deals fall apart most. Right now, I would say inspection and appraisal are kind of tied for the two that are going to be the biggest risks for you. The loan, if you've got a good loan officer that knows how to pre-approve somebody and is really digging and getting thorough with pulling the documents, shouldn't be an issue. Shouldn't be an issue, but it still can be. So make sure you're working with somebody that does a good job. You've got some credibility. If your buyers bring their own lender, you want to talk to them and find out, how long they've been in the business, what kind of volume are they doing? Do they have any referrals that you can talk to about, the work that they've done in the past, that kind of stuff. You want to vet them out a little bit. But really inspection and appraisal are going to be the biggest one. So here's a couple things regarding the inspection. For your buyers, you want to be talking about all these things, certainly, but you really want to be talking about the inspection before they even write offers, right? Like when I'm out touring homes, looking at properties with buyers, I'm telling them, you've got the right to conduct investigations. You can make requests. You can seek to have items addressed. But remember, the property is sold as is, and the seller is under no obligation to do anything for you, okay? So I always speak in terms of seek to have things addressed. So what does that mean? Well, it's kind of ambiguous. I'm not telling a buyer, oh, we can ask for repairs. Oh, we can ask for a credit. Oh, we can ask for a price reduction. I'm not trying to plant those seeds right now. I'm really trying to tell them that, one way or the other, we'll find a way to get it addressed. That may mean the buyer is just taking the place as is because the seller's not going to do anything. And if you look at our buyer consultation form, one of the last things we do is set expectations. And that's the expectations you want to talk about, that it's a seller's market. They're a little bit hesitant to do repairs because they know they don't have to. Buyers are falling all over themselves to buy property, so they don't really have to do any sort of repairs for the buyers. So you want to be addressing that all the way up front. And then when you make the offer, you're going to talk about doing the inspection. And again, you reiterate the home is sold as is. And if there's anything that comes up that's a major health and safety, I use those two words all the time. If there's any major health and safety issue, we're going to seek to have it addressed in some capacity. So what's health and safety? Well, to me, in a home, it's all of our major systems, which are essentially the roof, the plumbing, the electric, and the foundation. Those are essentially the major components of a home, the systems that operate a home, right? The roof, the plumbing, the electric, and the foundation. And so I talk to my clients in those terms. I'm telling them we're looking for health and safety issues in the major components, right? If I see, some cosmetic stuff in the property, scuffs on flooring and chipping paint, if it's not FHA, maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe those are things that you shouldn't be focusing on. But if there's plumbing leaks, exposed electric splices or whatever, double tapping on breakers, if there's cracking in the foundation that's observable, around the perimeter or underneath the foundation or whatever type of foundation it is in the crawl space. If there's issues on the roof, some of the inspectors will crawl the roof or they'll send a drone to go investigate and take videos for them, right? You'll want to recommend to your buyer that they get a sewer scope and take a look at the sewer line and what that plumbing looks like. And then I tell them too that, depending on the year built of the home, there's going to be things on the inspection, right? These inspectors are paid to find as many things as possible, and they need to disclose as much as possible to protect themselves. So your inspection report's going to be 30 plus pages long, okay? And there's always going to be things issued. And one of the other best practices is make sure your buyer is at the inspection and can talk to the inspector to find out and ask, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how serious is this, right? Like if there's major cracking in the foundation, they might say, this is a 10, this needs to be addressed. You need to have an engineer come out here, a structural engineer to come out and take a look and see. You need to have a foundation person come and take a look at this and tell you what would be the remedy. How much is it going to cost to fix? Doesn't mean the seller's going to fix it, but we can ask. That's seeking to have it addressed or asking for a credit. Or if the buyer just loves that house and will deal with it themselves, maybe they take it as is. So the key talking points, health and safety, roof, plumbing, electric, foundation. Seek to have it addressed. Those are the things that I'm bringing up to my clients 4, 5, 6 times before we even get to the inspection, so that it's starting to sink in a little bit about what this process is going to look like. Okay. And then in a perfect world at the inspection, as we talk to the inspector and they point out all the things that are the major concerns, if there's going to be a repair request, I want to get that dialed in right then and there at the inspection, preferably. That way, it's fresh in everybody's mind. We don't have to go back and forth about stuff. It's just, here's the major things that we're concerned about. Boom, let's get it sent off. Okay. If your client has questions about the inspection, they always can call the inspectors after the fact as well to get more clarity, get more details. And if there are things that are specific, like in those roof, plumbing, electric, foundation issues, you're always going to encourage your clients to get a professional out there. there's a plumbing issue, let's call a plumber and find out what's it going to cost to fix. There's electrical, let's find out what it's going to cost to fix, right? So you want to always get quotes so your client knows what it is they're dealing with, because they may say at some level, this is too much to handle. I don't think I can go through the sale. I'm going to cancel. That's certainly a possibility. It's not the ideal outcome, but sometimes you got to know when to walk away. And if that's the case, then you encourage them and tell them, hey, this might be a little too much. You may want to, get out of this thing. Okay. Which they have the right to do based on the investigations. Okay. So those are some of the best practices. And, you guys hear me say the same things over and over and over again. And I do this with my clients because, people sometimes hear things, but they're not really listening. So I have a need to continually reinforce over and over and over and over again so that they hear it and then they listen to it. After 3, 4, 5 times, it starts to sink in more. And if I only ever said that whole dialogue one time at the inspection, they're not even paying attention. They're running around the house, checking things out, talking to the inspector. They're not even thinking about, what you're trying to, help them understand at this point in the contract. Okay. So anyway, so that's probably one of the biggest things about risk avoidance is just reinforcing these themes over and over and over again so that your clients are really understanding the relevance about what you're talking about. Okay. And then obviously task with deadlines. The first thing you should do when you open a deal, usually your TCs will do this, but get your timelines written out into your calendar. Like when are your inspection and investigation contingencies, all the contingencies due? You need to put them in your calendar and then set reminders for yourself a few days prior to decide if you need extensions requested or anything along those lines. Okay. And then managing other parties in the transaction, that leads into the co-broker relationship. It's so important, guys, just to keep the communication lines open. You want to be overly communicating with the other agent and you set them up as well. You start, planting seeds about, we may need a little more time for X, Y, and Z. If you're on day like 13 of your inspection contingencies and you don't have the report back yet, you should be thinking about asking for an extension now. Don't wait till day 17 to ask for more time because it's like too late. You don't have any leverage at that point. So be thinking about asking for time way in advance for close of escrow and all of your contingency timeframes. Okay. So it's all about maintaining that relationship and checking in and giving updates. You should never have to be asked for an update. You should be giving these updates proactively. Okay. All right. So repeat and referral business, it's all about excellent customer service. And I like to always under promise and over deliver. So what does that mean? Well, it means you temper lower expectations and then deliver at a much higher level. Under promise, over deliver. So what does that mean? Well, I'll give you an example. Even like when you're negotiating, if you have a buyer and you submit an offer and the agent says, the listing agent says, we're going to send you a counter offer tomorrow. The last thing you want to do is call your buyer and say, hey, we're going to get a counter offer tomorrow. You know why? I've said that before. And then the counter never comes and the seller accepts another offer. And then the buyer looks at you going, you told me you were getting a counter offer now or not? What happened? What's going on? Why would you tell me that? Right? So that's over promising. In a situation like that, I would say, look, I talked to the agent and they're expecting to have a response to us, hopefully in the next few days, right? That way, if they say tomorrow, I'm making it sure that we have a few days for that to happen. And then if the counter never comes, you tell them they did respond. They said they're not going to counter us, unfortunately. That was the response, right? So, temper the expectations. Don't overpromise and tell them, oh, we're going to get this, or they're going to accept our repairs, or they're going to accept our offer, or the appraiser said everything looks good, or whatever. Don't promise those things if you can't guarantee that's what the outcome is going to be. Okay. And real quick, going backwards about risk management and avoidance, for the appraisal on the listing side, for sure, you should always be at your appraisals. You should have a packet of information to give the appraiser, things like permits, if you have them that your client provided to you. Things like comparable sales, invoices for any improvements that have been done recently, and then be there to answer any questions and talk to them and just be a human. Find out if they have any concerns about anything at that point. All right, let's look at a couple things in Command, and then I think we're going to be close to wrapping up here. So first, let me stop my screen share and move over to Command. Okay, so let's get to home. I wanted to show you just two quick things inside of Command. One of them is using Command to manage your transactions. And so, we just made a list of the entire process of how to buy or sell a home, right? On the listing and buyer side, we kind of combine them together. In this section right here, opportunities, okay, opportunities. You have your pipelines. You have the listing and the buyer pipelines, okay? And let's say we want to look at the under contract section right here. Okay, here's under contract. If I open that tab, okay, I have somebody in my pipeline here in escrow. But if you look here, we got escrow, disclosures, inspections, appraisal, financing, clear to close. A lot of the things that we wrote already on our sheet, the timeline, right? So now what you can do is go into Command and you can create your own flow by clicking this Edit Stages button. So when I go to Edit Stages, I can change some of these things if I want, or I can move them around, drag them up and down, and I can add checklists to this. So let's look at this, what this looks like, okay? So I don't have repairs in here. So let's see, I'm gonna do an add a stage. I'm gonna call it repair request, okay? And I'm gonna put this, let's see, can I see back behind here? I can't even see where I wanna put it. I'm just gonna hit save, and it's gonna add it to the bottom. And here's what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move it. Sorry, I gotta move some windows around. Okay, so I'm gonna take my repairs. I'm gonna put this right after the inspections. Okay, so now I have added a stage that I can move people through. And here's the other thing I can do is once I go into my stages, I can make checklists in here. So let's say for the repair request, I have 0 items under here for the checklist for now. I can click add item. And I'm gonna say the first thing I need to do is get inspection report. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is call client to discuss. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is get quotes or help client get quotes, right? And then the next thing I'm gonna do is call agent and send RR, the repair request form, okay? So now I have, right, repair request 0 of 4 items. So now I have a checklist. So as I move people through the stages, right? Like I'm gonna take my deal, move them down here to repair request. And then if you notice here, under repair request, look, 0 of 4. So as I move through the transaction, I can go in here and I can start checking off. I got the report, I talked to the client, now we're getting quotes. Okay, so I have a few more things to do in terms of just getting the quotes now, okay? So I wanted to show you that inside of Command. That's how you can customize and edit your own your own stages and checklists as you go through the timeline. A good time to do this is when you do your first deal, document everything as you go through, and then add your client through the stages here, and then be thinking about, what did I do? What do I want to pay attention to for the next time? Let me make a checklist for that. Let me add that to my checklist here, okay? And that's how you can keep track of your people, keep track of your deals. That'll help you significantly, especially with risk management, because you're really paying attention and monitoring the flow of the transaction. Okay. The next thing I wanted to show you this is, let me see here, documents. Okay. What do we have in terms of documents? So what's required in a transaction? Well, you guys know I do my contract class videos. They're all on a YouTube channel. You can review them all at your leisure. But inside of Command, when I click on my client, right, I go to my person here under contract. There he is under repair request. I click the name, and it brings up basically the card information for everything that's going on with this person, the profile of the client, and then documents. Okay, so when I get in here into Command in the documents section, our transaction checklists, all the documents required on a transaction live right here with inside Command. Now, I've already done this, but when you first open the document section of Command, it's going to ask you which checklist do you want to do. And as you can see, I've got residential. And what it's done is it's filled everything in for me, right? In consultation, I've got the buyer representation agreement, referral agreement, W-9, and you can see optional, conditional, and also conditional. And then I go to under contract. And then you're going to see a whole bunch of required things like the agency, obviously the purchase agreement, a bunch of the advisories, counter offers if necessary. And then all the disclosures, all the documents live here inside of Command. So if you ever want to know where's the checklist, what's required, what's not required, what's conditional, what's not conditional, it's all going to be right inside of Command. And there's 3 tabs: consultation, under contract, and closed. And if there's any specific things that you're adding, you can add additional folders and upload other one-off documents. Okay. So that's the second thing I wanted to show you is where our files live and our checklists live. And then the last thing I wanted to show you, super cool, another reason to be using your app. Okay. If you go down here to consumer, remember consumer is things like your website and your app. Okay. Your app comes with what's called guides. Okay. Guides. And then let me, one second. I'm going to share my screen real quick on my phone. If I can remember how to do this, there we go. Oh, a plugin is required. That's a bummer. Let me see, it's installing it. Hold on, let's see if we can make this happen. Okay. I think you guys can see my phone, right? Yeah, thumbs up. Anybody? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the consumer app, okay? Now, if you look towards the bottom, there are tabs, and I'm in the search tab, right? And this is just gonna show me all the properties for sale around me. So here you guys see where I live and listings around me. So this is what your app looks like if you've never seen it. The feed tab would be for your clients where you can communicate with them directly by, adding properties, things like that. But the middle one is called guide. And what we've got here are guides on things like buying a home or selling a home. Okay, so you can see buying, it says, start your search, get pre-approved, tour homes, negotiate an offer, home inspection, protect yourself with contingencies, home insurance, home warranty, close of escrow. And this is like a checklist. And this attaches to your client's contact record inside of Command. And you can see the little blue check mark for get pre-approved. That's because me personally, this is my app, and I'm logged in as me, obviously, and I have been pre-approved, quote unquote, as I move through the process. And look, there's a buying and there's a selling guide, okay? And if I click on these, right, marketing your home, it's gonna pull up, an ability to, at the bottom, mark as completed, things like that. Click on this one. Okay, start your search. So you see here, this is where it tells your client what is the first step in starting my search. And at the bottom, I can mark it as completed. So this would be as a consumer, right? And now look, I just marked it as completed, I'm done. So this is like a checklist for your clients to follow along in your transactions. Okay, so how do I do anything with this? You can edit it, going back into command here. I'm going to show you where to go to edit your guides. So I showed you, right? I clicked on the consumer tab, bottom left. And then right here at the top, one of the tabs at the top is guide builder. And when I click on this, it's going to enable me to do a couple things. Number one, obviously, is edit, right? If I just click on the 3 dots, it allows me to edit the guide. And here's where you can pick each one of these things and choose to edit the text. You can change the picture. You can reorder them. You can do whatever it is that you want. And there is an intro here as well when they first open the consumer guide. Okay. Now, I got to be honest, guys, this is probably one of the coolest things that is underutilized inside of Command and the app. I'm hoping that you're sending your consumer app out to people to be browsing, because you know they're probably already looking on Redfin or Zillow or Realtor.com. They need to be browsing within your app, because when they do, you can see what properties they're looking at, and you can interact with them through the app, and you have a huge value add. These guides are really, really great because it's a marketing pitch, right? This is something when you are prospecting or talking to your clients and they say, yeah, we've thought about owning, but I don't know, we'll do it someday. Hey, let me send you my app. There's a guide that shows exactly how to buy a house, and you can follow along with it. And I'll be able to follow along with you. So I'm going to text it to you. Text me back as soon as you've downloaded it. Okay. So how do you text your app to people, right? Remember, you go into consumer and you go to site and app settings. And then you go to URLs right here. And this little URL right here, it says app URL. You copy that link and you can text that to your clients. And when they click it, it'll download, it'll go to the App Store for Android or Apple. And once they download it, it's going to automatically assign you as the agent. Okay. But if your clients go directly to the app stores and download the KW app, they have to go and like actually assign you as their agent. But if you give them this link, it'll automatically assign you. Okay. And then they'll have the guides. They'll be able to browse listings and neighborhoods, and you can interact with them through the app. Okay. So no password needed. Rassi, I think it should just automatically install. I can't recall exactly. Let me see if I can log out. Let me look at the app real quick.
Hey, Nick,
Yes.
I actually sent that link over to my buyers and it did not assign me as their agent.
Oh, really? Okay. I'm not sure why that would be, but in the app on the More tab, they just got to go in there and type your name in and it'll find you.
Okay.
Yep. I'll check into that and see what if anything's been updated or something new that we don't know about there.
I
Okay,
had the same
thank you.
issue in the past too.
Did you? Okay. Got it. I'll play around with it and send it to a few people and see what kind of responses I'm getting in terms of why that might be happening. So let me look into that for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, that's the consumer app. That's where to get the app. That's where they kind of create the guides again, which is very powerful. And folks, I think that is it. As I look through our slides and notes, that's it. So, does anybody have any questions, comments, anything that we can answer for you today?
I have a couple questions.
Let's hear it.
So in the guide, to creating the guide, you know how in design there's like smart campaigns and whatnot. Is there some kind of a design to help you build your guide, or even build a new guide or different guides to put into your app as well? More detailed or anything?
You can, so when you're in the guide builder, you can, let's see. Let me go ahead and share the screen again. This is what I did when I was putting my guide together. So basically, you know, when you open the guide builder, okay, it has all the steps that are automatically added. A lot of the stuff's already there. So if I want to alter this, obviously I can just take steps and drag and drop them. But let me see, how do I do this? If I click it, right, on the right-hand side, it tells me what kind of step is this. I can replace the image here if I would like, and I can change the title and the subtitles and so on. Okay, so that's some things that I can do. And then at the very bottom is add a step. And this is where you can add a custom step or pick something from the default and re-add it if you maybe had deleted it. And you can pull your own images as well. So what I did is protect yourself with contingencies. This one is something I added. And what I did is I went to, what are some of the sites for stock images? You can go to sites for stock images and get free downloadable graphics. So I just grabbed a picture of a home and I wrote up a little information about contingencies. And I would say less is more. You don't want to, overwhelm people with too much information for the most part. So you want to be really kind of basic about things because you want to have a reason for them to call you if they have questions about things. But that's how you would edit the guides. And I don't recall that you can, add a guide at this time. I'm sure they'll offer the ability to add other custom guides like investing or even leasing or whatever. But at this time, I think all they have is it's just the buyer and the seller, but you can customize them as much as you would like.
Thank you. And then my next
What else,
question
folks? Yeah.
is in regards
Yeah.
to we have the buyer's timeline. Is there anything in the seller's timeline that should be mentioned that was not already mentioned in the buyer's timeline, like the steps prior to closing a deal accepting an offer?
I mean, not too much. In the escrow process, they're going to do their escrow instructions. Both parties are. They'll have to get their grant deed notarized. As I mentioned, that's the last step is to record that grant deed. They're given a copy of that to get signed and notarized in the escrow packet. But otherwise, it's pretty self-explanatory. You could add things like, we talked about completing the disclosures. You could be more specific about completing the repairs prior to close, right? That's obviously one thing that would go on there. But otherwise, not much. I mean, prior to getting an offer accepted, obviously there's things like, those are the major points in a deal that all parties are going to be paying attention to.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? All right. I'm not hearing much. Okay, folks. Well, we're wrapping up Ignite. Last day today. As I mentioned, we will launch the class again. We do have all of these recorded in our YouTube channel at kwpe.rocks, ROCKS. And, the contractual stuff, you really get a good grasp of it by selling a lot of houses. So let's get out there, find some deals, do the lead gen. And, if we haven't met in the past, week or two, let's get on an appointment. Love to chat with you and find out what's going on in your business. And otherwise, I will say signing out for Ignite, first of the year for 2021. We'll be back shortly with a new round in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, all.